Every morning, millions of people around the world reach for the same jar without thinking twice about who put it there. That smooth hazelnut and chocolate combination sitting on your breakfast table did not arrive by accident. It arrived because one Italian family, the Ferreros, spent nearly 80 years building an empire so quietly and so deliberately that most people consuming their products every single day have absolutely no idea who owns them. A $38 billion dynasty hiding in plain sight inside your pantry. So who exactly is the Ferrero family, and how did they end up owning your mornings? Today, we are going to unwrap the remarkable story of the secret family that controls your chocolate, your cookies, and your everyday cereal. Chapter 1. The numbers behind the name. Giovanni Ferrero is Italy's richest man. His personal fortune sits at $48 to $62 billion. The company his grandfather started in a tiny pastry shop in northern Italy now employs over 48,700 employees across 36 production plants on every inhabited continent. It generates 19.3 billion euros in annual revenue, a figure that represents nearly 1% of Italy's entire national economic output. Chocolate, it turns out, creates more reliable national influence than most politicians ever manage. The brands carrying that fortune are names you already know without realizing they belong to the same family. Nutella, Ferrero Rocher, Kinder, Tic Tac, Butterfinger, Crunch, Keebler cookies, various fruit snack lines that fill the lunchboxes of children across America. Blue Bunny ice cream sitting in grocery store freezers from Maine to California. Every single one of them flows back to the same source. A family in Alba, Italy that has never held a public offering, never granted meaningful press access, and never once explained their business to anyone who did not absolutely need to know. Their factories consume 25% of the world's entire annual hazelnut supply. Not a significant portion, not a notable share. 1/4 of every hazelnut grown on Earth ends up inside a Ferrero product. That level of agricultural dominance gives them leverage over entire farming regions in Turkey, Italy, and across the Black Sea coast that no other single food company on Earth can match. They do not merely purchase ingredients. They shape the market those ingredients trade in. Their Luxembourg headquarters has attracted the kind of sustained attention from European tax authorities that most companies would find uncomfortable. The structure is legal. It is also the kind of legal that requires a team of very expensive lawyers to maintain and a very deliberate decision to establish in the first place. The Ferrero response to scrutiny about their tax arrangements has been consistent across decades. They say nothing and keep growing. This is a family that built a $38 billion food empire on the philosophy that silence is a competitive advantage. And to understand how one family quietly conquered your pantry, you have to go back to a moment in 1946 when an Italian pastry maker had absolutely nothing and turned that nothing into everything. Chapter 2. Born from an empty pantry. The year 1946 in northern Italy was not a time for luxury. The Second World War had left the continent economically hollowed out. Supply chains that once connected European manufacturers to agricultural producers across the world had been severed. Cocoa, the raw material that makes chocolate possible, had become genuinely difficult and expensive to source for small producers. The kind of scarcity that destroys ordinary businesses was spreading across the food industry. Pietro Ferrero was not an ordinary businessman. He was a pastry maker working out of a small shop in Alba, a town in the Piedmont region of northwestern Italy, surrounded by rolling hills covered in hazelnut trees. Pietro looked at those trees and saw something that most people in his position would have overlooked entirely. He saw a solution. By combining locally abundant and affordably priced hazelnuts with a much smaller quantity of cocoa than traditional chocolate required, Pietro created a product he called giandoujotte. It was a solid block of hazelnut and cocoa paste designed to be sliced and served on bread. It tasted like an indulgence at a moment when genuine indulgence was something most Italian families could not access. It sold immediately and kept selling. A more spreadable version, Super Crema, followed shortly after, and it moved even faster. Pietro had not invented a candy. He had invented a craving. The distinction matters enormously because cravings generate repeat purchases in a way that ordinary products simply do not. Customers were not buying Super Crema because they needed it. They were buying it because once they had tasted it, they wanted it again and again. However, Pietro Ferrero died in 1949 at the age of 51. His heart gave out before he could see the first international expansion, before the name Nutella existed, and before any indication emerged that the block of hazelnut paste he had created in a small shop in Alba would one day be consumed by hundreds of millions of people on 6 continents. The company passed to his brother Giovanni and his 23-year-old son Michel. A young man inheriting a business with genuine momentum and the weight of a family legacy he had not yet had time to fully understand. Now, here is where the story gets more interesting. Chapter 3. The Architect of an Empire. Michel Ferrero did not approach his father's business as a caretaker. He approached it as a builder. Where Pietro had created a product, Michel saw the foundation of a cultural institution, and he spent the next 5 decades constructing it with a level of obsession and precision that competitors would spend generations trying to understand and never fully replicate. His first major act of transformation came in 1964 when he relaunched Super Crema under a new name, Nutella. The product was functionally similar to what Pietro had created 18 years earlier, but the positioning was entirely different. Pietro had sold a wartime substitute. But Michel was selling a morning ritual, a daily moment of sweetness that families across Europe could build their breakfast routines around. The distinction between a substitute and a ritual is the difference between a product people buy when nothing else is available and a product people specifically seek out. Michel understood that distinction intuitively and built everything around it. He created an imaginary ideal customer he called Valeria, using her preferences and daily routines as the reference point for every marketing decision the company made. This kind of consumer profiling is now standard practice in every major consumer goods company in the world. Michel was doing it in the 1960s when most of his competitors were simply making products and hoping people would buy them. Then Kinder Chocolate launched in 1968. It was designed for children with a marketing intelligence that recognized something most adult-oriented businesses overlooked. Children do not have purchasing power, but they have enormous influence over the people who do. A child who loves a product will ask for it, repeatedly and persistently, until the adults around them acquire it. Kinder understood that the real customer was the parent, but the real decision-maker was the child. The Kinder Surprise Egg arrived in 1974 and combined chocolate with a small toy hidden inside a plastic capsule nested within the chocolate shell. It was so appealing to children and so effective as a repeat purchase driver that American safety regulators banned it for containing a non-edible item inside a food product. The ban lasted until 2018. Ferrero eventually created a modified version called the Kinder Joy, specifically for the American market, separating the chocolate and the toy into 2 halves of the same egg rather than nesting one inside the other. The next was Tic Tac, which launched in 1969 and demonstrated that Michel's vision extended well beyond chocolate. A breath mint in a transparent plastic case with a satisfying flip-top lid became one of the most recognizable small consumer products in the world. Not because it was dramatically better than competing mints, but because the packaging created a sensory experience that people associated with the product itself. The sound of Tic Tacs rattling in their case became a form of brand recognition that no advertising campaign could have purchased. Then in 1982, Michel created what many observers consider his masterpiece, Ferrero Rocher. Ferrero Rocher is a sphere of hazelnut cream surrounded by a whole roasted hazelnut, encased in crispy wafer, covered in milk chocolate and chopped hazelnuts, wrapped in gold foil, and presented in a clear plastic dome that made the product visible as a gift before it was even opened. Every element of the design was intentional. The gold foil communicated luxury. The transparent packaging made the gift visible. The pyramid arrangement in the box turned a box of chocolates into a display object. Michel named the product after the Rocher de Massabielle, the rocky grotto in Lourdes, France, where the Virgin Mary reportedly appeared in 1858. His Catholic faith was not separate from his business. It was embedded within it at every level. By the time Michel handed operational control to his sons Giovanni and Pietro Jr. in 1997, the company he had inherited as a 23-year-old with a solid block of hazelnut paste and a small shop in Alba had become a global presence in 170 countries with revenues that placed it among the largest food companies in Europe. Next, the next chapter would test whether that legacy could survive the weight of what it had become. So keep watching to find out. Chapter 4. The Wall of Silence. Michel Ferrero earned a reputation as the most secretive major industrialist in Europe, and he cultivated that reputation deliberately because he understood that secrecy was not merely a personal preference. It was a genuine competitive advantage. The Ferrero factories are designed so that no outside contractor ever sees the full production process. The company builds its own manufacturing equipment using internal engineering teams. The technicians who maintain that equipment are Ferrero employees. The knowledge of how their products achieve the consistency and quality that defines the brand exists inside the company and nowhere else. Competitors have invested substantial resources in attempting to reverse engineer the Nutella formula for decades. None have produced a product that consumers accept as equivalent. Michel placed a statue of Our Lady of Lourdes in every Ferrero factory around the world. He organized company pilgrimages to the sacred site in France, chartering private aircraft to transport employees to Lourdes on trips that blended religious devotion with corporate team building in a way that reflected his genuine belief that the two were inseparable. He was not performing faith for public relations purposes. He believed that the quality of what his company made was connected to the spiritual seriousness with which it was made. His employees understood this, and many of them shared it. The company's Luxembourg tax headquarters became a fixture in discussions about European corporate tax practices. The structure is entirely legal, and the Ferrero family has maintained it without modification through multiple rounds of European regulatory scrutiny. Their response to questions about it has followed the same pattern as their response to most external inquiries: acknowledged without elaboration and then set aside in favor of returning to the work of building the business. Giovanni maintained his father's commitment to secrecy after assuming leadership. The company has never held an initial public offering. It has never brought in outside investors. It has never created any governance structure that would give people outside the family meaningful influence over its direction. In an era when nearly every company of comparable size operates under the scrutiny of public markets, analyst calls, and shareholder activism, Ferrero remains answerable to no one outside its own family. That independence has preserved a consistency of vision across 3 generations that publicly traded companies almost never achieve. But the wall of silence could not prevent every uncomfortable reality from eventually becoming visible. And the Ferrero story has a shadow side that the gold foil cannot conceal indefinitely. Chapter 5. The Cost of the Hazelnut. In 2019, investigative reporting and labor organization research produced evidence that children as young as 11 years old were working on Turkish hazelnut farms connected to Ferrero's supply chain. Turkey produces approximately 70% of the world's hazelnuts, and the harvest is labor-intensive, concentrated into a short seasonal window, and historically dependent on migrant workers, including families who bring children into the fields during the picking season. The allegations created genuine reputational damage for a company whose products are marketed heavily to children and families. Ferrero responded with the establishment of formal zero-tolerance child labor policies and supplier audit programs requiring farms in their supply chain to demonstrate compliance with international labor standards. Independent observers acknowledged the programs as more rigorous than what most food companies in comparable positions had implemented, while noting that the structural economic conditions driving child labor in seasonal agricultural communities cannot be resolved through procurement policy alone. Romanian subcontractor Pelagius was terminated in 2016 following what Ferrero described as inconsistencies in their operational practices. The corporate language used to describe the termination was precise enough to confirm that something serious had occurred and vague enough to avoid specifying what it was. Palm oil has remained a persistent source of environmental criticism directed at Ferrero. Nutella contains palm oil as a key ingredient, and palm oil cultivation has been linked to deforestation in Southeast Asia, particularly in Indonesia and Malaysia, where vast areas of tropical forest have been cleared to establish palm plantations. Ferrero maintains sustainable sourcing certifications and argues that certified sustainable palm oil represents a meaningful improvement over uncertified alternatives. Environmental organizations have consistently argued that the certification systems in use do not adequately prevent the deforestation they are designed to address. The Luxembourg tax structure continued drawing scrutiny as European governments pushed for greater transparency and harmonization in corporate taxation across the continent. Ferrero's arrangement remained legal throughout this period, while becoming increasingly conspicuous as a symbol of the gap between where large corporations generate their profits and where they choose to be taxed on them. The family's response to all of these issues followed the same template that Michel had established for responding to external scrutiny of any kind. Acknowledge the specific concern, implement a formal response, commission documentation of that response, and return to silence. Whether this approach reflects genuine accountability or sophisticated reputation, management has been a matter of ongoing debate among journalists, labor advocates, and environmental organizations for the better part of 2 decades. Chapter 6: The Foundation and the Family. Not every element of the Ferrero story invites skepticism. The Ferrero Foundation, established in 1983, represents something genuinely unusual in the history of large family-owned businesses, and it deserves to be understood on its own terms. Michel Ferrero built the foundation on a straightforward premise. The workers who spent their careers building the Ferrero empire had earned something more than a pension when those careers ended. The foundation provides retired Ferrero employees with healthcare programs, organized social activities, cultural programming, and continued connection to the community they had been part of during their working years. Former factory floor workers in Alba attend foundation concerts and health screenings with the same regularity they once attended morning shifts. The community that built the business remains connected to the business long after the employment relationship formally ends. Michel summarized his philosophy in 3 words: work, create, donate. The foundation is the donate element of that formula, executed at a scale and with a consistency that distinguishes it from the charitable programs most corporations establish for reputational purposes. It exists because Michel believed it should exist, and because Giovanni has maintained that belief as a fundamental inheritance from his father that is not subject to quarterly budget reviews. Michel met Maria Franca Fisolo when she worked as an interpreter for the company. Their marriage produced Giovanni and Pietro Jr., and their shared presence in the business created the family continuity that carried the Ferrero vision across decades. When Michel died in 2015 at the age of 89, the tributes that came from workers and community members in Alba and from the broader business world described a man whose influence on daily life in the Piedmont region was inseparable from the chocolate products that had made that influence possible. But Pietro Jr. never had the opportunity to see his father's final years. In 2011, while cycling in South Africa, Pietro collapsed and died of a heart attack at the age of 47. The parallel to his grandfather, Pietro Sr., who died at 51 in 1949, struck observers as a painful dynastic echo. 2 generations of Ferrero men named Pietro, both lost to heart failure at similar ages, both carrying the weight of what the family had built. Giovanni found himself alone at the top of an empire that his father had designed to be shared, and he made the decision that defined the next era of Ferrero history. Chapter 7: The Acquisition Machine. Giovanni Ferrero looked at the company his grandfather had started, and his father had built and made a calculation that departed significantly from everything that had come before. Organic growth, the kind that had taken Ferrero from a pastry shop in Alba to a presence in 170 countries over 7 decades, was no longer sufficient to meet his ambitions. He wanted to double the company's size every decade. Achieving that required buying market position at a speed that growing products one at a time could never deliver. In 2017, he restructured the company's governance by appointing La Possibili, a professional executive with no family connection, as chief executive officer while moving himself into the executive chairman role. The move shocked observers who had watched 3 generations of Ferrero family members maintain direct operational control as an article of faith. Giovanni viewed it as a rational adaptation to the complexity of managing a company that had grown beyond what any single family member could effectively oversee. The acquisitions came quickly after that. In 2018, Ferrero purchased the entire United States confectionery business of Nestlé for $2.8 billion. Butterfinger, Crunch, Baby Ruth, and several smaller American candy brands changed ownership in a single transaction. Most American consumers buying those products at checkout counters had no idea the brands they grew up with now belonged to an Italian family they had never heard of. That same year, Ferrero acquired the cookie and fruit snack businesses of Kellogg's for nearly $3 billion. Keebler cookies, Famous Amos, and a collection of fruit snack products that had occupied American grocery aisles for decades moved under the Ferrero umbrella without any meaningful public announcement. The Keebler elf remained on the packaging. The Ferrero name appeared nowhere visible to consumers. In 2023, Ferrero acquired Wells Enterprises, the company behind Blue Bunny ice cream and Halo Top, extending their reach from the snack aisle into the frozen dessert category. The purchase of Free System, Italy's leading frozen bakery company, added another dimension to a portfolio that had traveled far from its hazelnut and chocolate origins. The cumulative effect of these acquisitions created a situation that most American consumers have never consciously registered. A child eating Keebler cookies after school, snacking on fruit chews from their lunchbox, finishing a Butterfinger, and then having a Blue Bunny ice cream bar after dinner, has spent an entire afternoon funding the same Italian family's fortune without encountering their name on a single piece of packaging. Giovanni had not merely grown the business. He had made it invisible in the most profitable possible way. Chapter 8. The Empire in the Present. The Ferrero family in 2026 controlled a food empire that Pietro could not have imagined from behind the counter of his Alba pastry shop in 1946. The numbers tell part of the story. $38.9 billion in personal fortune for Giovanni, 48,700 employees, 36 production facilities, 19.3 billion euros in annual revenue, 170 countries, 35 brands, 25% of the world's hazelnut supply consumed inside their factories every year. But the numbers do not fully capture what makes the Ferrero story genuinely remarkable. Other companies have achieved comparable scale. Very few have done it while maintaining complete family ownership across 3 generations, absolute operational secrecy, no public market obligations, and a corporate culture coherent enough to survive the deaths of its founders and the expansion into categories its founders never considered. Giovanni's growth targets remain actively in force. The acquisition pace of the past decade shows no sign of slowing. The categories of the global food industry that Ferrero has not yet entered are narrowing as each transaction extends the portfolio further from its origins. The question of whether the 4th generation of the Ferrero family will inherit a company that still resembles what Michel built, or something that has grown into a fundamentally different kind of institution, remains genuinely open. Their sustainability commitments reflect the scale of what they now manage. 96% cocoa supply traceability, 79% hazelnut traceability. Audit programs covering thousands of individual farms across multiple countries. The environmental and labor controversies that emerged in the 2000s pushed the company toward more formal accountability structures than Michel ever felt necessary, while the family's fundamental resistance to external scrutiny remained intact. Nutella has traveled further from Pietro's original hazelnut block than any simple product evolution could explain. It has become a cultural reference point for the concept of indulgence itself, generating dedicated cafes, cookbooks, recipe competitions, and brand collaborations that no food company in 1946 could have designed toward. The product that began as a wartime substitute has become something people organize experiences around. What Pietro Ferrero created in 1946 was a solution to a problem. What Michel transformed it into over the following 50 years was something closer to an institution. And what Giovanni is building now is something still being defined. An empire that has already outlasted the governments, economic cycles, and consumer trend shifts of nearly 8 decades and shows every intention of continuing to expand. The same question that hangs over every great family dynasty eventually arrives at the Ferrero story too. What is the ingredient that cannot be manufactured, cannot be acquired, and cannot be replaced when it is gone? And now, we would love to hear from you in the comments. Were you aware that the same Italian family behind Nutella and Ferrero Rocher now owns the cookies in your children's lunchbox and the ice cream in your freezer? And do you think that level of quiet dominance over what the world eats is something consumers should pay more attention to? Let us know in the comments section, and make sure to subscribe to Global Status for more stories like this. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.